Hello, everyone. Greetings from Madrid, and welcome back to our webinar series in Conversation With. Today, we are going to be discussing with a representative from 4V, the Destination Management Organization of Vancouver Island region in Canada. I am Virginia Fernandez Trapa, Program Coordinator at the Sustainable Development of Tourism Department in the World Tourism Organization. And I'm very happy to be your host again. I'd like to start by thanking my colleague Roxana Astari for the support preparing this session, as usual, and also to our guest, Kyla Egan. She is the Tourism Development Specialist at 4V, one of the signatories of the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. Thank you, Kyla, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is ours. So let's dive into our conversation regarding your climate action work, and especially how you have mobilized the value chain in your destination to foster climate action. So in your climate action plan, Kyla, by the way, congratulations for developing the plan. You mentioned that for this work on climate actually began with signing the Glasgow Declaration, which makes us really, really happy. Could you let us know how the signing ignited your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So to provide a bit of history, in 2022, we became a social enterprise, which is quite unique within our industry. But what that meant as a tourism management organization is we wanted to refocus our measures of success on community and ecosystem well-being rather than strictly visitor growth year over year. In addition to that, we are an island-based destination with many nature activities, which means that we are extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And these impacts are increasing locally year over year. We can see with the duration and consistency of forest fires, floods, and droughts. And for that reason, it essentially means that we felt becoming involved in climate action was essential to promoting responsible destination stewardship. And in addition to this, oh, there you are, Virginia. And so essentially the Glasgow Declaration, we felt, provided us with a clear course of action to move responsible destination stewardship and climate action forward. And really what that looked like is over a 8-month period of time, we created our climate action plan around the 5 pathways of the Glasgow Declaration. We engaged with our community partners and tourism stakeholders. We consulted with local and global experts. And then we created a destination carbon audit to help show us where we should be putting our time and energy around decarbonization. Where the Glasgow Declaration really helped us in that was they connected us with like-minded destinations around the world where we could, share and educate with one another. A lot of the climate action plans were public and other available resources through the UN WTO, which really helped us get an idea of what was out there already internationally. And then finally, the 5 pathways themselves really provided us with a framework for which to plan both our reports, the climate action plan and the destination carbon audit. So that was the way in which the Glasgow Declaration really helped us ignite our journey.
Thank you so much, Kyla. It really makes us it makes us very happy to hear that report and how the framework of the pathways is being useful. I hope it is the case for other signatories too. Your destination, Vancouver Island region, is very popular, and it has, of course, like every destination, I would say, many different players alongside the operation lines. And so another question is, as the DMO responsible for this region, you said you have established a greenhouse gas inventory, like the carbon audit. And how did you foster partnerships to move climate action forward?
Mm-hmm. So we have been an organization for about 60 years. And for that reason, we're extremely fortunate to have many longstanding partnerships with economic, social, and environmental organizations within our region. When we first set the scope of what the destination audit was going to be, we reached out to our public and private partners to see if they would be willing to share data and information that we could use to help inform our studies. And because of the trust that we had developed over all those years, it really helped facilitate that collaboration. Moving forward, we have shared the Destination Carbon Audit and Climate Action Plan with hundreds of tourism stakeholders and rights holders throughout British Columbia. And it's actually led to a lot of really interesting collaborative opportunities that normally tourism management organizations wouldn't become involved in. So two that I can point to. One is we work with a food and beverage collective to figure out how we can create carbon neutral food production on Vancouver Island region. Another interesting example is we work with local universities to train students on the net zero economy so that they have the skills they need when they enter into the tourism workforce.
That's extremely interesting. You mentioned already that your climate plan is aligned with the declaration pathways, but how could you, let's say, how did you define the goals or key actions per pathway, and yeah, how did you approach basically integrating the pathways with actions that maybe you already had ongoing?
Yeah, so during the climate action process, we had quite a bit of engagement. We held many focus groups, surveys, one-on-one interviews with our tourism stakeholders and rights holders. And the actions that you see in our climate action plan actually come directly from the recommendations of our stakeholders. We wanted our action plan to be firmly rooted in a practical approach, but also reflect the desires of the stakeholders and peoples and communities that we are supposed to serve. In addition to that, we had about 28 actions out of those recommendations. We, as a destination management organization and also as an organization that does sustainable tourism consulting, have quite a bit of experience in turning plans into implementation. And so we took those 28 actions and we looked at our financial resources, our capacity, and our partnerships, and we planned year over year what reasonably we could get done. And so for this year, we are moving forward 7 actions off of our climate action plan. And if we keep this pace, we'll actually be done quite a bit before 2030.
Fantastic. Can we dig a bit deeper, perhaps, on one of the pathways, the regeneration pathway? I mean, Vancouver Island's forests, wetlands, soil, and seaweed are powerful carbon sinks that help to mitigate climate change while providing vital habitat. How are you fostering this pathway as a DMO?
Yeah, so our main overarching goal for the regeneration pathway is to make sure that the tourism industry on Vancouver Island collects and invests $10 million into environmental regeneration by 2030. Most of the other key actions in that pathway really speak to building capacity around environmental regeneration for various stakeholders. So this could look like training tourism operators on energy and water conservation, or it could look like promoting Indigenous tourism or championing ocean conservation. 2 specific projects that we work on that fall within this category. One is with Ocean Legacy and Surfrider, and we constructed ocean plastic recycling depots on the east and west coast of Vancouver Island. The reason that we did this was because many residents were going out, taking initiative, collecting garbage out of marine ecosystems, and then there was nowhere to recycle it. So developing that infrastructure was critical to make sure that the pollution wasn't ending back up in the ocean again. Another project that we've worked on that is quite unique to Canada and is becoming increasingly more common here was an organization called Allied Certifications. And what they do is collect an optional eco fee from tourism operators and then give it to local First Nations. And the First Nations can then use it for environmental regeneration and stewardship within their traditional territories. The pilot project on Vancouver Island has collected more than $1 million, and this holds huge potential, especially because in our region, we have more than 50 First Nations and very high Indigenous involvement within our tourism industry.
Well, bravo, amazing. I really like the integrated approach between mitigation and adaptation, or if we use the pathways nomenclature, decarbonization and regeneration. We can see it was quite a collaborative effort to put together the climate action plan. What would be your recommendation for those that are just beginning their journey to develop a climate action plan?
Well, I have a couple of tips. So the first is really around communication. Before you go out in your destination and start engaging with tourism stakeholders, I would really recommend making sure that you're clear on what the risks that climate change holds to your particular destination and what the benefits are that climate action holds to your tourism operators, even the business case. So an example that I frequently use in British Columbia is due to the increase of forest fires and smoke here during the summer, our tourism seasonality is starting to shift. And many tourism operators need to start adapting now in order to become more resilient in the future to this shifting seasonality. So that's a very practical example of what risk it poses to the industry. I would also say that when talking to skeptical populations, which can still happen, I really base my stories or my talking points more in connecting stories rather than data and statistics. So what that looks like is here on Vancouver Island in many of the coastal communities, they engage in salmon fishing. So when I'm speaking with these coastal communities, I go, 20 years ago, how big were the salmon here? And then people say, oh, they're massive, they're huge. And I go, well, how big are they now? And that story connects their personal experience to the realities of climate change. Another popular example that I use here is we were a temperate environment for a very long time, but we've had continued heat waves. And I will be in a room, I said, who here has purchased an air conditioner for the first time in the last 5 years? And half of the hands go up. And those more personal connections really help resonate this kind of ambiguous climate change with the direct realities. And it feels as though people are more open to talking about it when they can see it in their everyday life. Another example that I have more on the technical side, my key learnings is we worked with an organization called Synergy Enterprises. They specialize in GHG emissions audits for the tourism industry, really relying on their technical expertise in addition to our expertise around destination stewardship made the project a lot more valuable and also is what allowed us to move forward very quickly on it. 8 months is quite a short amount of time for both a climate action plan and audit. And then, so I would recommend finding the right partner for your organization. And then finally, I think a lot of organizations feel very overwhelmed by climate action when you're looking at it for the first time, but there are so many resources and individuals out there who are willing to help and share their knowledge with you just to get started. And my recommendation is really breaking it down into what can you as an organization do? What do you have control over? Who can you partner with to make a bigger impact? And finally, at a higher level, what can you advocate for? You may not have direct control over it, but who are the change makers and influencers that you have access to help advocate for climate change? And breaking it down into those 3 categories can really be helpful to figure out for destinations and organizations how and where they can start.
Very, very useful recommendations and very practical. Thank you so much. Kyla, if you agree, I'm curious to see if any of our colleagues connected today would have any questions for you. Colleagues, do you have questions for Kyla? Please raise your hand and we will give you the floor. So while the colleagues are thinking about their questions, Kyla, maybe one question for me on the carbon audit. Oh, wait, we see Vicky Smith. She's ready to ask something. So I'll give her the floor first. Vicky, can you use one sentence to introduce yourself so we know who's talking, please?
Sure. I'm the founder of a startup called Earth Changers, which promotes positive impact tourism as a B2C operation. Kyla, thanks very much. I was interested, as a social enterprise now, do you encourage the commercial businesses within your region to also become social enterprises, or are your relationships with them much as they were before, and they're just commercial businesses?
That's such an interesting question. So our kind of approach is that we educate everyone on what a social enterprise is. It's quite still a new concept in this area of Canada. We inform them of the benefits and the risks, but ultimately it's not necessarily the right fit for every business, but we do want every business and kind of our general destination to be aware that it is an option they can pursue. For anyone on the call that isn't kind of aware of our social enterprise model, we are, and for many years have been, a tourism management organization that's responsible for destination marketing, stewardship, development of the Vancouver Island region. However, 2 years ago, we started operating under a social enterprise model. So in addition to our destination management responsibilities, we have also pursued sustainable tourism consulting, and the surplus profit from that consulting is then reinvested back into our destination through innovative projects. So for example, the surplus profit from these consulting services actually paid for a climate action plan and destination carbon audit. So it's a new source of funding that allows us to move these kind of innovative projects forward in a way that we wouldn't regularly be able to. So it's a great option for a lot of businesses. In Canada, there is technically no legal or tax status for a social enterprise, but you can become certified with one through third-party organizations. So it is part of our story. It's part of what we talk about, and we do inform people on the social enterprise, but we don't push in any way to make sure that businesses are also implementing it. So I hope that helped answer your question.
Yeah, cool. I was kind of interested if it changed your dynamics with, in effect, who your member organizations are.
No, so we are a regional DMO, and in Canada, that means that we are largely receive Crown funding year over year. So anyone within our region is a stakeholder who works in the industry, and that's who we represent. But we don't actually have paying members as part of our organization. So we can work with hundreds of tourism stakeholders and give them all the information that they need, although we aren't bound to represent specifically any paying members.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, Kyla, for sharing on the governance and how you're coping with the shift, right? Because there are many DMOs or destination marketing organizations that are now transitioning into destination management organizations, and somehow sometimes struggle to really encompass the new work streams more related to sustainability into the budget lines. So I think it's a very useful and practical comment once again. Colleagues, do we have any more questions from the floor? Okay, so I guess I'll ask you my question, Kyla, if that's okay. I was just wanting to maybe ask you a few more details on the carbon audit. I know you were supported by the experts, but for those who have not been involved in a carbon audit, how would you describe it? I mean, what exactly did you look at? Can you share a bit more details with us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we measured the emissions of the tourism industry on Vancouver Island. Our baseline year was 2019. And what we looked at was there's approximately 10 million tourists that came to our region in that year. We used a bottom-up approach, which is quite unusual. So we looked at primary source data, how many flights are coming in from any given country, how many nights of accommodation are there in total. And then we collected this data from a whole bunch of public and private partners, everyone from airports and conference centers and ferries. And this is where kind of that trust comes in. And then essentially we looked at the findings. And what the findings were is that there was approximately 2 million tons of GHG emissions created by the tourism industry in that year. And just that sounds like a large number, but to make that more kind of a practical reality, it's the equivalent to 540,000 cars driving on the road year round. For a destination that's relatively small, we only have about 840,000 people. That's the equivalent to increasing our population by almost 60%. And so it was important for us to understand the scale, and we really wanted to see if there was any surprises in where those carbon emissions were coming from. And we, like most areas, transportation was about half of the emissions. But what really surprised us was about 33% of all the emissions were coming from the food and beverage industry. And traditionally, although they are technically part of the tourism industry, they're often treated a little bit as a separate sector. And so we hadn't traditionally really collaborated with them very much or spoke to them very much. And the findings of the study for us, we decided that, well, this is going to be a key partner going forward. This is where we can really decarbonize. And so we started reaching out in our region and seeing what was being done by local food producers, from local farmers and growers, all the way up to restaurants and bars, and seeing what they were doing. And we were pleasantly surprised to find there was already a huge amount of climate action work being done in these spaces. We just weren't connecting and amplifying into it. And so that was really a key learning coming out of our destination carbon audit. And we're creating various resources in collaboration with these groups in order to move decarbonation forward over the next couple of years. But that was incredibly useful to us as well. And then we kind of saw the breakdown of, how many carbon emissions per tourist was being created, and then figured out, what we have to do year over year to get that down. But yes, it was an incredibly useful exercise, everything from scoping, focus groups, developing data, and then putting it all together into findings.
How long did it take, more or less, in months?
8 months.
8 months.
But that was from the very first day to when it was published. So that was quite fast, actually. I thought it was going to take longer, but because we knew the industry so well, and because our partners had done elements of destination scoping before, we could kind of put our heads together and figure it out a lot more quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say very efficient. Outstanding findings. Did you happen to also come across initiatives on food waste, or was it mainly upstream that you were looking at food initiatives on local sourcing, etc.?
It was mainly upstream. Unfortunately, our region, there isn't as much action in food waste, just because of the way that the garbage infrastructure is developed. But it is another area that we need to investigate further in the future.
Absolutely. I love the connection also with plastics when you mentioned it under the regeneration pathway. We are pushing for plastics and food waste on our end as, let's say, ways to integrate more circular economy principles in the tourism value chain. And of course, we consider circularity as a climate action strategy. So very nice to see those being already applied in Vancouver Island region. Okay, we're almost reaching the end of the webinar. I'll ask the colleagues again if somebody has a question. Colleagues, anybody with something else for Kyla? Okay, Kyla, I think that's a wrap for our conversation, I guess. Really, thank you for sharing your journey and insights. I think you're doing an amazing job. It's very inspiring. Your dedication is very inspiring, and I really hope that our colleagues and all the Glasgow signatories, Glasgow Declaration signatories at large, will be able to apply some of the takeaways and recommendations that you very well framed here today. So really, thank you, much appreciated. And thank you to everyone connected. We really hope to see you again in our next episode. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.